Today, we're talking about something that might surprise you. There are some European countries where Americans don't exactly get a warm welcome. Now, this doesn't mean Americans are banned or hated in these places, but if you're thinking about moving, working, or even traveling there, you might face some challenges. Some of these countries have strict immigration policies, while others have cultural or political reasons for not being so open to American visitors. So, if you're from the US and planning a European adventure or considering a long-term stay, you might want to think twice about these destinations. Let's get into it. Switzerland. Switzerland is often ranked as one of the best countries in the world to live in, thanks to its high quality of life, breathtaking landscapes, and stable economy. But while it's a dream destination for many, it's not exactly welcoming to Americans who want to stay long-term. Switzerland has some of the strictest immigration laws in Europe. Unlike EU citizens who can move there with relatively few restrictions, Americans face a much tougher process. If you're from the US, you can visit Switzerland visa-free for up to 90 days, but if you plan to stay longer, work, or settle down, that's where things get complicated. One of the biggest hurdles is the country's work permit system. Switzerland prioritizes hiring EU citizens, which means that if you're an American, you need to have a highly specialized skill that isn't already available in the Swiss job market. Even if you do find an employer willing to hire you, the company has to prove to the Swiss government that they couldn't find a European citizen to do the job. This process is long, expensive, and often discourages companies from hiring non-EU candidates. Even if you do manage to get a work permit, the cost of living in Switzerland can be overwhelming. Cities like Zurich, Geneva, and Bern consistently rank among the most expensive in the world. Rent, food, transportation, and healthcare are all pricey, and if you're earning an average salary, you might find it hard to keep up. While wages are high in Switzerland, the cost of everyday life can eat up a large portion of your income, especially for newcomers. Then there's the cultural factor. The Swiss are known for being private, reserved, and structured. Unlike in the US, where small talk with strangers is common, Swiss people tend to keep to themselves. It's not that they're unfriendly, it's just that they have a strong sense of personal space and social boundaries. Making friends as an expat can take time, and if you don't speak one of the country's official languages, German, French, Italian, or Romansh, integrating into Swiss society can be even more challenging. Switzerland also has strict rules and regulations that might seem unusual to Americans. There are specific laws about when you can do laundry in apartment buildings, when you can make noise, and even when you can recycle. For example, in some areas, you're not allowed to flush your toilet late at night because it could disturb your neighbors. These kinds of rules reflect Switzerland's strong emphasis on order and respect, but they can feel restrictive to Americans who are used to a more relaxed way of life. Buying property in Switzerland is another challenge. If you're not a Swiss citizen or an EU national, purchasing real estate is heavily regulated, and in many cases, it's nearly impossible. The Swiss government wants to prevent foreign investors from driving up housing prices, so there are strict limits on how many properties can be sold to non-residents. Despite all these challenges, Switzerland remains a top destination for wealthy expats, high-skilled professionals, and tourists. If you're an American visiting for a short period, you'll likely have a great experience. But if you're planning to move there, you should be prepared for a long and difficult process. For many Americans, Switzerland's beauty and stability aren't enough to outweigh the challenges of living there long-term. Number 2. Austria. Austria is known for its rich history, beautiful architecture, and classical music scene. But when it comes to welcoming Americans, the country has a reputation for being a bit cold. It's not that Austrians dislike tourists. Vienna is actually a popular travel destination, but moving there as an American can be a challenge. One of the biggest hurdles is Austria's strict immigration policies. If you're not from the European Union, getting a work visa is difficult, and Austria isn't particularly open to foreign workers unless they have highly sought-after skills. There's also a cultural element at play. Austrians value their traditions and way of life, and they're not always the most welcoming to outsiders who don't fully integrate. Language is another barrier. While many Austrians speak English, they expect people who live there to learn German. If you're an American who doesn't make an effort to speak the local language, you might find it tough to connect with locals or even secure certain jobs. And then there's the cost of living. While not as expensive as Switzerland, cities like Vienna can still be pricey, and wages for non-EU workers aren't always competitive. So, while Austria is a great place for a short visit, it's not the easiest place for Americans looking to move or work long-term. Number 3. Hungary. Hungary is a fascinating country with a deep history, stunning architecture, and a growing economy. But in recent years, relations between Hungary and the US have been a bit tense, and that has affected how Americans are treated there. The Hungarian government has been vocal about limiting foreign influence, and that includes American businesses, organizations, and even some expats. While Hungary does allow American tourists without a visa for short stays, those who want to move there might find it difficult. Work permits and residency applications have become harder to get, and there have been cases where Americans faced extra bureaucratic hurdles compared to European applicants. There's also a cultural factor. Hungarians can be warm and friendly once you get to know them, but they can also be skeptical of foreigners who don't make an effort to understand their culture. If you move there and don't speak Hungarian or try to fit in, you might find yourself feeling like an outsider. Number 4. Russia. Russia is a land of extremes, grand historical landmarks, vast landscapes, and a deep-rooted culture that has fascinated the world for centuries. From the iconic Red Square in Moscow to the artistic wonders of St. Petersburg, it's a place that offers a unique and unforgettable experience. However, for Americans, Russia is not always the most welcoming destination, especially in recent years. First, let's talk about visiting Russia as a tourist. Unlike many European countries where Americans can enter visa-free, Russia has a strict visa process. US citizens must apply for a visa in advance, which requires an official invitation from a hotel, tour company, or a Russian citizen. The application process can be lengthy and sometimes unpredictable, with additional security checks. Once you arrive in Russia, you also need to register your stay with local authorities, which adds another layer of bureaucracy. While tourists generally don't face open hostility, it's important to be mindful of political tensions between the US and Russia. These tensions can sometimes affect the way Americans are perceived, especially in government-related matters. However, ordinary Russian citizens often separate politics from personal interactions. Many Russians are warm, hospitable, and curious about foreigners. If you show interest in their culture, history, and traditions, you're likely to have positive experiences. For those looking to live and work in Russia, things become more complicated. Getting a work permit is challenging because Russia prioritizes hiring its own citizens. Foreign workers, especially from non-EU countries like the US, must have a highly specialized skill or be sponsored by a Russian company willing to go through the complex visa process. Additionally, in recent years, there have been increasing restrictions on foreign businesses, NGOs, and media, which can make it difficult for Americans to find opportunities in certain industries. Language is another major barrier. While younger Russians and professionals in big cities may speak some English, the vast majority of the population speaks only Russian. If you don't learn the language, day-to-day life can be difficult, as many official documents, public signs, and even restaurant menus are only in Russian. Culturally, Russia is different from the US in many ways. Social interactions can seem more reserved at first, but once you build relationships, Russians are known to be loyal and generous friends. However, the social environment can be challenging for those who aren't used to Russia's direct communication style and traditional values. Safety is also a factor to consider. While most visits to Russia are trouble-free, foreigners, especially Americans, can be subject to extra scrutiny. It's important to follow local laws carefully, avoid political discussions, and be mindful of your surroundings. In recent years, diplomatic tensions have led to occasional restrictions on American travelers, so keeping up with travel advisories is crucial. Despite these challenges, Russia remains a fascinating country to visit. Its history, architecture, and cultural richness make it a unique destination for those willing to navigate the complexities of travel and life there. For Americans, it's not the easiest country to move to or work in, but with preparation, respect for the culture, and an open mind, it's possible to have meaningful experiences in this vast and diverse nation. Our last country is Belarus. Belarus is one of the least welcoming places for Americans in Europe. In fact, it has some of the strictest visa requirements for US citizens, and diplomatic relations between the two countries have been rocky for years. If you're an American wanting to visit, you'll need to go through a complicated visa application process, which includes lots of paperwork and government approvals. Once you arrive, you might find that Belarus isn't as open as other European countries. There are strict laws on movement and speech, and foreign visitors, especially from the US, might be closely monitored. Unlike other European nations that rely on tourism, Belarus doesn't actively encourage American visitors, and expats who have lived there often describe feeling unwelcome or even watched by authorities. If you're an American considering moving or working in Belarus, the challenges are even greater. The government has put restrictions on foreign businesses, and work permits for Americans are not easy to obtain. Because of the political climate, many Americans choose to avoid Belarus altogether. So, there you have it, 5 European countries where Americans might not get the warmest welcome. Again, this doesn't mean you can't visit these places, but if you're planning to move, work, or stay long-term, you'll likely run into some challenges. What do you think about this list? Have you ever experienced difficulties traveling to or living in any of these countries? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more travel and culture content. See you in the next one.